What if I told you that in medieval Europe, a woman could be accused of witchcraft simply because she made eye contact a little too long? That's right, wink at the wrong monk. And suddenly, you're consorting with the devil. The Middle Ages weren't just about knights and castles. They were a fever dream of religious paranoia, male insecurity, and a deep, sweaty fear of women who dared to feel desire, or worse, inspire it. Behind every witch burning, every sermon about purity, and every modesty law was a collective panic attack about female sexuality. So, today, we're diving into how seductive women became the ultimate scapegoat, from forbidden love potions to the church's full-blown PR campaign against cleavage. Oh, and before we begin, hit subscribe. You'll need emotional support after this one. History isn't pretty, but at least here it comes with sarcasm and trauma bonding. Let's get right into it. Number 1, Eve did it first. Let's start with the OG scapegoat Eve. According to medieval theologians, all of womanhood's crimes began when one curious lady decided she wanted knowledge, or, depending on which monk you asked, a snack. Eve's bite of that apple became the spiritual equivalent of a nuclear bomb for women's reputations. Clergymen turned it into the ultimate excuse for centuries of female shaming. See, they said, women are naturally weak, seductive, and morally unstable. Translation, if a man sins, it's her fault for looking too good. In medieval sermons, Eve wasn't just a cautionary tale, she was the prototype for every temptress, witch, and sin vessel that followed. Artists painted her naked and blamed her for all human suffering, which is kind of like crashing your own car and suing the person who designed the traffic light. By the 12th century, scholars like Peter Lombard and Thomas Aquinas were writing that women's bodies literally invited demons. Yes, apparently Satan had a thing for soft curves and self-confidence, and if a woman used her looks to influence a man, well, she wasn't flirting, she was summoning hell. Basically, the medieval church invented the idea that women's beauty was both divine and deadly, the holy paradox that guaranteed every woman lost, no matter what she did. Number 2, the church, the bedroom. Now, picture this, you're a medieval wife. You're told sex is sinful, but also your marital duty. The church literally published manuals telling men when, how, and how not to have sex, usually with the enthusiasm of a tax auditor reading an erotic novel. According to 13th century clerics, sex was fine only for procreation. Enjoying it, that was dangerous, especially for women. If a woman enjoyed sex too much, it was proof she was lustful, maybe even possessed, and if she didn't enjoy it, well, then she was frigid and ungrateful. The patriarchy finding new ways to make women lose since forever. Confessors would ask women detailed questions about their carnal sins. Some priests even recorded women's fantasies not for forgiveness, but for spiritual study. Translation, medieval voyeurism in the name of God. And then came the kicker if a woman got pregnant from an affair. It wasn't always her baby. Sometimes people claimed the father was an incubus, a literal demon who visited her in her sleep. This let men keep their reputations clean, while women got burned for sleeping with Satan. It's like the world's worst PR campaign, have sex, go to hell, don't have sex, still go to hell. Number 3, the dangerous allure of hair. You think bad hair days are stressful? Try living in the 14th century, when your loose curls could get you labeled a temptress. Medieval men were terrified of women's hair. Seriously, priests wrote entire treatises about how flowing hair symbolized sexual chaos. That's why nuns covered theirs, wives braided theirs, and prostitutes flaunted theirs. A woman's hairstyle could literally determine her social class and moral value. In one famous sermon, a priest declared that a woman's hair was the net in which the devil catches souls, which, to be fair, sounds like an excellent tagline for a shampoo commercial. So when women wore their hair uncovered, it wasn't just a fashion statement, it was rebellion. The kind of rebellion that said, yes, I have hormones and I'm not sorry. The medieval response, panic, slut-shaming, and sometimes public penance. Because nothing says fear of feminine power like a world where your hair is more scandalous than a battlefield massacre. Number 4. Love potions and lust crimes. Let's talk about magic, or, as medieval men called it, anything women understand that we don't. Love potions were the Viagra of the Middle Ages, and women often knew how to make them using herbs, wine, or questionable ingredients like animal hearts and menstrual blood. Hey, nobody said romance was clean. These potions were sometimes harmless folk remedies, but if they worked too well, suddenly, the woman was a witch. Because obviously, no man could fall in love on purpose. It had to be sorcery. Records show dozens of women tried for amorous enchantment, meaning they supposedly used magic to seduce men. In reality, it was usually just jealous wives, angry priests, or rejected lovers filing complaints. The most absurd part, men could use love charms too, but their magic was considered learned or scientific. Women's was diabolical. Because when a man mixes herbs, it's alchemy. When a woman does it, it's witchcraft. Basically, the entire witch panic started as a medieval gender bias dressed up in holy robes. Women couldn't win. Too pure. You're a saint. Too sexual. You're Satan's mistress. And honestly, that's still a vibe we haven't fully escaped. Number 5. The virgin or whore trap. Ah yes, the medieval moral compass so accurate it could only point to two directions, virgin or whore, no in between, no nuance, no chill. Women were expected to embody purity so impossible it made Barbie look relatable. Virginity wasn't just a virtue, it was currency. Your worth depended on an unbroken hymen and a reputation that screamed, I've never even thought about thinking about sex. If you failed that impossible standard, straight to societal hell. But all medieval literature is full of fallen women whose only crime was daring to be human. A widow who remarried could be called impure. A young woman caught smiling at a man could be accused of enticement. And prostitutes. They were treated like moral garbage one day, then like civic necessities the next, because someone had to serve the men who couldn't control themselves, right? The church actually built brothels in some towns to regulate sin. You heard that right, state-sponsored sex work, but with sermons, it's like someone merged OnlyFans with a confessional booth. Virginity obsession became such a cult that virgin martyrs saints who died before losing their purity were glorified. Their stories often involved men trying to rape them saying no, and then God rewarding their chastity with death. Because apparently, dying a virgin was the ultimate win condition. In other words, you either lived untouched or died trying. The system was rigged. The prizes were awful. And somehow, men still wrote the rules. Number 6. The lustful nun problem. You'd think convents were safe from sexual drama, right? Nope. Welcome to the weirdly eroticized world of medieval nuns, where repression met rumor, and every scandal became a morality play. Nuns were supposed to embody holy purity, but everyone secretly believed they were one sinful dream, away from chaos. Medieval writers loved to spread stories of nuns having affairs with priests, sneaking out at night, or gasp enjoying each other's company. One 14th century text even accused nuns of unholy indulgence, which is church speak for lesbian panic. There were real scandals, too. In 1478, an abbess in Italy was accused of running her convent like a pleasure house. And while those claims were probably exaggerated, they reveal how obsessed society was with controlling women's sexual autonomy. A nun couldn't be spiritual and sexual. That combo short-circuited the medieval male brain. But here's the irony. Convents were often the only places where women could read, write, or lead. Some nuns used their chaste image to gain political power or study medicine. Others secretly wrote erotic poetry, disguised as devotionals. Because if the church gets to write love letters to God, why can't they? So, were nuns really lustful? Probably not. But medieval men projected their fantasies onto them, proving once again that if you lock up women's freedom, someone's imagination will always find a key. Number 7. The witch next door. By the late Middle Ages, the seductive woman trope had fully evolved into the witch. If a woman lived alone, owned herbs, or just didn't hate herself enough, she was suspicious. The 1486 book Malleus Maleficarum, The Hammer of Witches, basically declared that women were naturally prone to witchcraft because they were weaker in faith and more carnal. Translation: men couldn't handle being horny, so they blamed it on the devil. The authors: 2 German inquisitors with major mommy issues claimed witches used sex to serve Satan. They said witches could steal men's virility, seduce priests, and even kidnap penises. Yes. Seriously, one chapter describes witches keeping dismembered genitals in bird nests and feeding them grain. Freudian. You bet. This book went viral medieval style and fueled witch hunts across Europe. Tens of thousands of women were tortured and executed, mostly widows, healers, and poor women who didn't fit into society's mold. Every burned witch was really a burned fantasy, the price of male fear dressed up as moral righteousness. In short, medieval Europe wasn't afraid of witches. It was afraid of women who didn't need men. Number 8. Courtly love. The illusion of romance. Finally, let's talk about the Renaissance's favorite lie, courtly love. If you believe the poets, knights were writing sonnets, worshipping ladies from afar, and dying for love. Cute, right? Except courtly love was basically emotional, BDSM for nobles designed to make lust look noble, and power imbalances sound poetic. The ideal woman was unreachable, married, pure, and totally uninterested. Her job was to inspire a man's suffering, not share it. And men loved this. It let them obsess over women without ever treating them as equals. Meanwhile, women who did fall for someone risked everything. Queens like Eleanor of Aquitaine played the game skillfully, using charm as strategy. But others weren't so lucky. One wrong glance, one flirtatious letter, and suddenly you're on trial for adultery or witchcraft. Courtly love wasn't liberation. It was fantasy packaging for control. It said we adore women, but only the imaginary ones. Because real women, they had opinions, and apparently that was more dangerous than dragons. Number 9. The holy orgasm panic. Let's talk about something medieval theologians absolutely hated: women having spiritual experiences that look suspiciously like orgasms. Mystical women like Saint Teresa of Avila described their encounters with God as ecstatic unions so intense they sometimes fainted or cried out. To anyone reading today, that sounds, well, erotic. And medieval men noticed too uncomfortably so. Suddenly, theologians started asking, were these women really talking to God or just experiencing divine foreplay? You can almost hear the panic in their parchment. The church loved female saints, but only if their passion was contained, controllable, and ideally miserable. If their holy ecstasy looked too pleasurable, that was dangerous. So, naturally, artists leaned into it. Paintings of saints showed blissed-out women arching heavenward, eyes closed, mouths open basically, proto-Renaissance thirst traps and gold leaf. Some church fathers claimed these visions were demonic seductions, that the devil was impersonating God to corrupt holy women, because, again, the medieval male brain could not compute that a woman might experience something divine and joyful without it being a cosmic booty call. It's almost funny, the same people who preached purity were the ones turning every miracle into a sexual scandal. In short, when a woman in the Middle Ages said she felt touched by God, men heard touched by sin. Number 10. The Widow's Curse. Now, if there was one woman medieval men really couldn't handle, it was the widow. She'd been married, so not pure, but she was no longer under a husband's control, so terrifying. Widows were legally independent, could own property, and sometimes even ran businesses. Basically, they were living proof that a woman could survive and thrive without male authority, and that made society deeply uncomfortable. Clergy warned that widows were susceptible to lust because they'd tasted the pleasures of marriage. The logic went something like, once you've had sex, you'll do anything to get it again, even consort with demons. Freud would have had a field day. They were also blamed for men's downfall in literature, from the seducing black widow archetype to Shakespeare's later conniving widows. And in real life, many were accused of witchcraft, especially if they inherited money. Convenient. Widow inherits wealth. Townsfolk panic. Problem solved by fire. It wasn't fear of sin, it was fear of self-sufficiency. The idea that a woman could live, earn, and even enjoy life outside the patriarchy unthinkable, so they called it evil. The curse of the widow was just freedom with a scary label. Number 11. The Erotic Confessional. You'd think confession, that quiet booth for unburdening your soul, would be safe from corruption. Spoiler, it wasn't. By the 14th century, priests had turned confession into one of the creepiest institutions of the Middle Ages. Men of God often interrogated women about their sins of the flesh in graphic detail. How many times? With whom? In what position? Yes. Those questions are in actual manuals. It wasn't spiritual guidance, it was spiritual voyeurism. Some confessors even encouraged women to sin again so they could come back and repent more. Others used the secrecy of confession to seduce or blackmail them. Eventually, the church tried to regulate it. They literally had to remind priests not to touch their parishioners during confession. That's how bad it got. One French bishop in the 1200s warned that confession is the devil's net for women, which is ironic, since the devil seemed to be wearing a cassock at that point. The confessional became a theater of control men, turning women's guilt and desire into entertainment, and the audience, the patriarchy, sitting comfortably in the front row. Number 12. The femme, fatale of the faith. So here's the paradox that defined the entire medieval mindset. They wanted women to be desirable, but punished them for being desired. Queens and noblewomen were told to be beautiful but modest, alluring but obedient, visible but silent. It was like living in a never-ending beauty contest where the prize was either sainthood or a stake. Women like Eleanor of Aquitaine, Isabeau of Bavaria, and Lucrezia Borgia walked that razor's edge perfectly, using charm and politics to survive in a man's world that both worshipped and feared them. But one wrong rumor could destroy everything. A flirtatious glance, she's bewitched him. A confident speech, she's manipulating him. A powerful alliance, she's seducing him. Medieval society didn't know what to do with female charisma, so it called it sorcery. And to be fair, watching men lose their composure over a confident woman probably did look like witchcraft. Because in a world where male virtue depended on female silence, any woman who spoke too loudly sounded like a spell. Number 13. The devil wears petticoats. By the end of the Middle Ages, the female tempter image was so embedded that even Satan started getting feminized. Artists painted witches riding broomsticks, not because of real rituals, but because they sexualized women's supposed midnight flights. The broom was a symbol of domesticity twisted into something obscene, a housewife turned horror. Hell itself was imagined as a woman's mouth, literal illustrations of souls entering fiery jaws shaped like vulvas. Subtle, right. Even damnation got gender-coded. And what's wild is how that imagery lingers today. Witch, seductress, homewrecker, slut. They're all just rebranded medieval fears. We traded torches for tabloids, but the suspicion of women's desire still smoldering. It turns out the devil didn't wear Prada, she wore whatever made men nervous. So what did we learn from this cursed history lesson? That for centuries, the most powerful thing a woman could do was simply exist in her own body. Medieval men built an entire theology around controlling that because they couldn't control themselves. The witch hunts, the purity cults, the sermons they weren't about saving souls, they were about silencing women who reminded men they were human too. And while we've burned fewer witches lately, the echoes remain every time a woman is called too much, too emotional, or asking for it. The ghosts of the Middle Ages are alive and scrolling. If history teaches us anything, it's that fear of female power never really dies, it just changes costumes. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.